Classical mythologies have shaped the very world we live in.
Yeah, whatever. I don't have time for dense, dusty old books, Paul.
Great. Well, that's what podcasts are for.
Oh, good point.
Join me, Paul, as I teach my best friend and improv comedy partner, Sarah, all about mythology on Myth Understood.
Mythology is frequently explicit, obscene, violent, and bizarre, though, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to joke about and improvise along the way?
Yes.
Oh.
So come for the mythology and stay for the absurdity on Myth Understood.
Available now at mythunderstoodpodcast.com and your podcast platform of choice.
It's Myth Understood.
It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Steven Sabel.
Hello, Quillers, and welcome back to Don't Quill the Messenger, brought to you by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. On today's episode, we invite back Cheryl Eagan-Donovan. She is the director of the film Nothing is Truer Than Truth. You may remember her from a previous episode of the podcast. She's also the recipient of the 2019 Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship Oxfordian of the Year Award. She has a long list of credits, including her previous documentaries, and she's working on a very important new book, and we're inviting her back to the program to talk about a lot of things. One, Cheryl, is the UK release of Nothing is Truer Than Truth. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm really excited about this and so happy that we can do this conversation right now because we are about to sign the agreement for the not just UK, but European and global release of the film. It will be through a Nordic company, and we're not doing the formal press release yet because we haven't actually signed, but it will be this week. So we've done a lot of work to get the film ready for release. We have retitled the film Shakespeare, the Man Behind the Name, which is taken from a line spoken by Derek Jacobi in the film. And we also cut a 55-minute version for television. So the strategy with this distributor is to do a British broadcast first, and then European broadcast as well, and then the rest of the world. And of course, it will also be available on VOD and streaming platforms and on DVD. But we're really excited about it. So finally, our friends...
That is super exciting. And exciting not only for you and for me and for all of us who are interested in the Shakespeare authorship question, but exciting for our listeners who are familiar with the previous podcast episode all about the film. And for those who maybe have yet to find it on the streaming services where it is available, why don't we remind people how to get it right now so that they can go watch it when they're done listening to today's episode?
Sure. It's currently available on Amazon Prime and on Hulu. And you just search the title, Nothing is Truer Than Truth. If you're a student and you have a free Amazon Prime account, it's free. But as I said, we're just really excited that now our friends in England and in Germany and in Australia, we have many supporters around the world who've been anxiously awaiting an opportunity to view it there. So this has, been a long journey. Again, as Derek says in the film, the journey is fraught and long, but we are here and we're super excited about it. And, cutting the broadcast version is something that we had planned to do, but I had probably the best editor I could ask for, my son, Liam Donovan, who just graduated with his degree in film and television last year. And, it takes a really good editor to help a writer kill her darling. So to cut an entire 30 minutes out of your film is not an easy task. He did an amazing job. And, he knows the film very well, of course. He can quote every line. But he also did a great job of preserving the score, because we had Katie Jazbowski write a beautiful score. that was written for the 85-minute version. And so to edit that and keep that integrity, you know, and keep the essence of the film and the story arc as well, it was a challenge, but I'm really, really pleased with the results. So really happy
That's
about that.
fantastic. I'm so excited to hear that it's going to be so globally available now. And, you know, because I remind people all the time that the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship is an international organization, and we do have members in many countries across the planet. And I'm so glad to hear that this is now going to be available to people all over the globe, because it does serve as a form of outreach, not only for the Shakespeare authorship question and the Oxfordian premise, but also the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship as well. So it's a wonderful thing, and I'm excited that that's going to be available. I'm glad that our listeners know how to go and view it. You know, on my Amazon Prime account, it will commonly recommend that I watch that movie.
Great. That's good to hear. I'm really happy about that. You know, we love when people post comments as well, too. If you watch the film and you enjoy it, please, you know, go ahead and put a note to that effect. That helps us a lot. So that's great news. You know, the strategy with this company, it's a Nordic entertainment distributor that does factual and drama series, is to present the film at MIPCOM, which is the biggest film market in the world. It's held at Cannes every October. And this year, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have no idea if there will be an in-person market or only a virtual one. But regardless of that, Shakespeare, the man behind the name, will be the featured film in the catalog of programs in the history section. So again, we're very excited about the marketing plan, and the fact that, again, first up is broadcast, and then not only Europe, Australia, but Asia, Latin America, South America. So it's a real wide release. So very exciting.
Well, and I know that you're also now working on a book project as well, you Renaissance lady, you. So tell me a little bit about what's going on with that.
Sure. Thanks. You know, I teach Shakespeare and screenwriting and filmmaking, and in the process of teaching screenwriting particularly, but back to back with teaching Shakespeare as part of, British literature and world drama, I discovered that Shakespeare's characters could be very instructive when crafting scripts. So I'm working on a new book, Shakespeare Auteur, Creating Authentic Characters for the Screen. And the premise of the book is that Shakespeare was the original auteur, a writer, director, who infused his work with his own life experience to create these three-dimensional, multifaceted characters who are unforgettable. You know, the perfect mix of archetypal, universal character with really quirky individual personalities. So I have focused the book around the idea that De Vere's creative methods parallel that of other auteurs, from Godard to Truffaut in the New Wave, and Kurosawa, the Japanese director, Fellini, all the way through to modern day directors like Chris Nolan, Wes Anderson, Gus Van Sant, Baz Luhrmann, Sofia Coppola, Greta Gerwig, and Spike Lee. So I think it's a really interesting idea. I've never seen it presented this way before, so I'm really excited to speak about it at the symposium and get this book out there to help screenwriters create really unique characters.
It must be very exciting for your students you just that string of directors that you just listed off right there. It must be really exciting for them to be familiar with the works of some of those more modern directors and be able to connect that work back to some of these classical writers and particularly Shakespeare. And I should think that might open the door for a lot of them to be more interested in the Shakespeare authorship question, as they realize that the more modern directors you mentioned have so much more in common with Edward de Vere than they do with William Shakespeare of Stratford.
Exactly. Yeah, that is really the connection, because someone like Fellini clearly drew on his own life experience in all of his films. He's the, epitome of an auteur. The same with Truffaut. His own life experience growing up, is in all of his films. There's a theme throughout there. And people like Gus Van Sant, part of the reason that I used clips of films in my film, Nothing is Truer Than Truth, is that is the portal, the way in for students to connect with the films. Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet, Gus Van Sant's My Own Private Idaho. These are films that reference Shakespeare in the same way that Shakespeare referenced other works that preceded him, the same way that De Vere drew on the classics but then added his own experience. So, for example, in My Own Private Idaho, one of the things that makes that film so interesting is that it not only references Chimes at Midnight, the Orson Welles interpretation of Henry, but also obviously the Henry trilogy, but it also incorporates Van Sant's own experience in Portland as a young man. So one of his first films is called Mala Noche. I got to see him present that at a film festival and talk with him about it afterwards. It was about street kids, living in Portland. So he was able to bring those things together in one film and expand the original concept, that Shakespeare started with. And I think Baz Luhrmann has done the same thing with his very modern interpretation of Romeo and Juliet. Kurosawa, of course, did many interpretations of Shakespeare's work. He did a beautiful adaptation of Macbeth called Throne of Blood, which probably has the scariest Lady Macbeth I've ever seen. I love to show that to my students. And of course, he did Ran, which is an interpretation of King Lear. So what's really interesting, too, is that not only are there parallels between De Vere's method and the approaches of these writer-directors today, but that they have kind of a intersectional relationship as well. So
Kurosawa's Throne of Blood is so iconic and made such an impact on so many people that I have actually seen live productions of Macbeth that have copied that theme and that concept. And I do believe there's even a stage version called Throne of Blood.
There is. They did it at the OSF. Yes, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival did a production. I was able to see it. I was so fortunate. I was there that year for the SOF conference, and Jamie, who's in my film, was in it. It was brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you think about how certain art sort of circles back on itself, it's sort of an interesting factor to what it is that we do as artists when, we steal a little from here and we imitate a little from there, and then we refashion with our own experiences or our own element that we want to include into the storytelling and make it our own through this sort of, I like to refer to it more as like homage art in the sense that it's not plagiarism when you're acknowledging and giving credit to the originator. Right. And just like Kurosawa made no bones about the fact that he was definitely doing a Macbeth with his own style and his own concept with his own country's history. I think it's interesting that, then somebody else came along and went, that movie is so great. Let's turn it into a stage production, and we'll make no bones about the fact that we're doing Kurosawa's version of Macbeth. Right. And so just keeps layering on there. And I think that's something that our writer was so brilliant at doing, was taking some original work, layering on his own experiences, his own life, his own autobiographical references, as well as contemporary aspects of the time, political things that were happening, statements that were being made, even fashion choices that are commonly referred to in the works, which I think is something that's oftentimes under-considered when we think about who the true author is, because certainly this guy from Stratford would have had very little access or exposure to the fashion trends of high society at the time that were coming from Italy and France and Germany and Russia. And they're all mentioned in the plays in different ways and in different times. And I think just along those lines of adding layer after layer after layer, is that what you would say is truly the hallmark of a true auteur?
Well, I think in some ways that's part of the process, but I do think that drawing on one's own life experience and exploring the same theme throughout the work, throughout a body of work, trying to answer those same questions. We see that with Chris Nolan. He's been asking the same question since his first short film that he made, black and white, 16 millimeter in London for about £5,000 when he was a grad student. It's called Following, and it's about being a writer. So there's always been this kind of meta thing going on with Chris Nolan about what does it mean to be a writer. And I think that's the other key. The auteur theory says that the director is the author because it's the director's vision that creates the film, that gives life to it. So for me, what connects here with Shakespeare is the idea that our Shakespeare, Edward de Vere, was both a director and a writer. And those two skills coming together are what give the plays and the poems such life, such enduring charm and relevance and just pure entertainment and food for thought, so it's fusing those two skills, the ability to direct, have that big vision, but then the very solitary act of writing and revising and revising.
Well, and we do know too, because there's historical evidence that does exist, that Edward was also a performer. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's crucially important. Being a director and a writer, and having worked with so many different actors throughout my career, both on the stage and behind the scenes, or from the director's table. One of the things that I pride myself on, and that most of the actors that I've worked with would acknowledge, is one of the things that makes me a better director is being an actor and having knowledge and language and shorthand to work with actors and provide them what they need and the insights and the direction that they're craving in order to get from them what it is that I want to help tell the story. How many of these other directors that we would call the auteurs of their day have actually also been performers?
Well, I would say not that many, not that isn't significant. Greta Gerwig, clearly, right? So Greta's big breakthrough film was Lady Bird, which was nominated for an Academy Award a few years ago, and she did win for screenplay. But she was an actress and became a director, I think because she had that understanding of what it took, to make a great film and to be a great actor. But I think that, it's really important in my film when Derek Jacobi makes that point, that there is clear evidence in the plays and in the sonnets that Edward de Vere, as Shakespeare, knew what it was to be an actor, to get up on stage, to put on a costume. So, oftentimes people say, well, the man from Stratford, we know he was an actor, so therefore he must have been the writer. But we don't often talk about the fact that Edward de Vere also clearly understood what it was to be an actor. So I think that's very important.
Not just an actor, but a talented musician, mm-hmm. the Queen's favorite dance partner.
Yes.
So he also was a skilled dancer, which is in itself a performance art. In those days, it was not necessarily as much of a performance art as it is today, but it was certainly a performance art in the sense that people commented regularly about what a skilled dancer he was. He had a fine leg for a tune, I think, is one of the quotes.
Right. And I think that's a through line here with these auteurs is that bringing their art to the film as well. So, for example, Kurosawa was studied as a painter. He was going to be a painter, and his films are very painterly. The way that he uses light shows that. And, for example, Fellini started out drawing, caricatures in Rome, on the sidewalk at the Sidewalk Cafe. So he was fascinated with American comic books, So each of these auteurs brought to their vision of their films not only their ability as writers, but their other artistic sensibilities as well. So again, similarly to De Vere. One thing I wanted to talk a little bit about, if I could, is, the process of connecting with people to make the film happen, because I think it's really important. And I was supposed to speak at South by Southwest. I was invited to speak at the big film festival in Austin, Texas in March, and it was canceled the week before we were supposed to go. And I was going to be a mentor for screenwriters and talk with them about their work. So we did eventually have those meetings over Zoom virtually. But one thing that I tell my students and my clients and these mentees, filmmakers who had signed up to, meet with me at South by Southwest, is that this is really a business about relationships. At the end of the day, that is absolutely the most important thing. And the way that my film got from an idea to a finished film to global distribution is really all about the people that I met. And so, for example, with this film, I found my editor, my narrator, my composer, and both of my distributors through people that I met through the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. So, for example, Carol Sue Lippman introduced me to a friend of hers who wrote for The Hollywood Reporter. He introduced me to a friend of his who was an Italian editor living in Los Angeles. She was too busy to take on my film, so she referred me to her assistant. Zemo Huang was the person who edited my film, and he is now very successful. He was with WME, now he's with CAA, but he is a very sought-after editor, and I got him on the way up, which was fantastic. Similarly, she helped me find my narrator after looking long and hard for the person with the right gravitas, the right voice for the narration. And, my composer, when I was looking for a person to write the score, I started by asking people, who do you know? I met with someone from Boston, a few people. I know a few people in Boston because I've been working in the film community here for a long time. And then I got a referral from my friend from The Hollywood Reporter. His sister teaches at Berkeley, so she said, I have a student, he just graduated, he's out in LA right now, you should talk with him, he's good. We met with him. He didn't understand my film at all. The stuff that he wrote was like a dirge. It was very dark and depressing. Zemo and I said, nope, this is wrong. We kept looking, and another friend of mine, who's a very talented filmmaker in her own right, and became one of my associate producers, her daughter is a PR person in LA who does public relations for celebrities, and a friend of hers introduced me to Katie Jazabowski. And Katie was the perfect person because she had studied the music of Ennio Morricone and Nino Rota. She knew exactly what I was looking for in terms of the Italian theme for the film. So it's really all about people. And finally, to find both of my distributors, that happened because of Rick Wagaman. He invited me to screen a very early cut of the film at his home with just a few friends. But one of the people there is a very accomplished producer and writer in his own right. He gave me some great feedback and then introduced me to someone else who is, again, very accomplished American producer, but with a lot of connections in the UK, someone who's also written wonderful articles about music. So these Renaissance people, have become my true friends and mentors. And this was exactly how my film has found each of its homes. And it's just, I can't stress how important that is, and it's not to, in any way, to discredit everyone who helped to make the film possible, because these are just a few of the people, so many people volunteered their time and gave, small donations to help the film get to where it was. We got large grants from organizations. So it really is a collaborative effort. But I'm very
and an
fortunate.
Entire series of 6 degrees of separation.
It's
where
absolutely
this connection
true.
led to another, and that one led to
Exactly.
another. I once attended a presentation that Gloria Loring, the famous television actress and Emmy Award winning actress and Grammy Award winning song artist. And she said that you're only 6 people away from the person you need to help you accomplish whatever goal it is you are trying to accomplish. And the secret is to tell everyone, because you don't know who might be sitting next to you who knows the person you need to know to make it happen. And ever since I had that encounter with her, I have always believed that to be true.
Right.
Her theory was that there is a conspiracy in the universe working toward your benefit. You just have to learn how to tap into it. So
Right.
it sounds like you really tapped into the conspiracy that was working toward your benefit and the benefit of making this film happen. And now it's wide global distribution.
Right. No, it's true. I mean, it's definitely, it's about intention. That is true, I believe, but it's also about being open to what people can give, because oftentimes you're asking them for something and that's not what they can do to help you, but you have to be open to how they can help you. That I think is really key. That's something I try to tell my clients and my students.
And I know that you have some future film projects lined up, and I want to talk about those in just a second.
Sure.
And when we talk about those, I want to talk about my audition to be narrator of your next film.
Oh, great.
But prior to that, I want to talk about a little bit more about your book. How far along are you? When do you expect to be in publication? Is this a book that you will then incorporate into your classroom instruction as a textbook? And is it a book that perhaps other teachers of film history or film composition might be able to use in their classroom instructions as well?
Well, definitely, I would hope so. I certainly will use it myself, as I said, because it grew kind of organically out of the process of teaching. In addition to teaching screenwriting and filmmaking, one of my favorite classes is the Masterpieces of World Cinema, where I get to introduce my students to Fellini and to all of the neo-realists and right up until, Hard Day's Night. And so it's just so much fun to introduce people to these great directors that they haven't previously been exposed to. So yes, that is my goal. Where it is right now, it's at the proposal and several chapters stages, so I do need some time. This has been a good time for working on creative projects. So I do need a few more months to get it in shape, but I'm excited about that because, I do a lot of speaking at conferences. I go to the writers conference every year. The AWP is the big writers conference for people with books to promote and teachers. So it's a combination of both writers and teachers. It's usually about 15,000 people. Obviously, this year, who knows? Well, I don't think we'll be able to get together in person, but that is really what I love doing, is talking to people about film and about writing and about Shakespeare. So it gives me a way to put all of those things together. And yes, I'm always looking for good books for teaching my classes. There are several that I rely upon, but I would hope that this would be one that other instructors would find useful as well. So,
okay, so now I have to ask you, best Shakespeare film ever.
Oh, that's so hard. I have the British Film Institute little book of 100, and each one has its own things that make it beautiful, right? There's no one like Olivier and Richard III. It's so over the top. It's incredible. And I think, for example, George Cukor's Romeo and Juliet is amazing, but of course I love Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet. I think because I saw that when I was younger, I just absolutely love that film. Best ever, really hard to say.
Okay, I'll make it easier for you by eliminating all of the modern adaptations. So we're not talking about best film based on a Shakespeare play, like some of the ones you mentioned, My Private Idaho, 10 Things I Hate About You. There are a lot of, in fact, probably half of the movies made are actually based somehow on some sort of Shakespeare plot. But
right.
So we'll take those off the table. But clearly including a majority of Shakespeare text, what would you put in, say, your top 5?
Well, the Branagh films are all, Branagh. There isn't a bad one, really. And as I said, the Olivier films, whether it's Hamlet or Richard III, are really masterpieces. And I think, I would put Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet up against Zeffirelli's any day. I think they're both quite good and they work well together. Other Zeffirelli, he's done Macbeth. I mean, for me, it's just really hard to have a favorite. It's like trying to pick your favorite child, I mean, how about you? I'll ask you because it's hard for me to say what's my absolute favorite.
So I believe that Zeffirelli is the master. Mm-hmm. And I think if you put his Romeo and Juliet, his Taming of the Shrew, and his Hamlet all together, you have 3 of the best.
Right.
And most people don't know that Zeffirelli's Hamlet is starring Mel Gibson. They falsely believe that it's Mel Gibson's Hamlet because he's such a filmmaker in his own right.
Right.
But he did not make that film. He just starred in Zeffirelli's version of Hamlet.
Right.
So there's a clarification that's super important, I think. I think Branagh's Henry V
absolutely.
and obviously Much Ado About Nothing are quintessential viewing, especially Much Ado. Much Ado is, I think, one of the most perfect plays ever written, quite honestly. And then Branagh's version is really, really masterful. I can't say I feel the same way about his Hamlet, though. I think it's very self-indulgent.
Interesting.
And his Love's Labor's Lost is fun and cute, but I think too concept for me, perhaps.
Interesting. Yeah.
The whole musical theater aspect of it, I think, kind of
fell flat.
Jumps the shark, as it were.
Yeah. Well, many of these films are ones that I did incorporate, obviously, in my film because they are quite iconic. And I think that, looking at what great directors are able to do with the material just brings home again, how much there is there to explore, how...
I have such a great affinity for Orson Welles, though, his entire life, his entire career and his entire life. And especially when you know the history of what Hearst did to him and how he basically had to flee to Europe in order to do anything. And you look at his films, like his Othello, I think stands up against anyone else's Othello.
Yes.
And I think his Macbeth, especially when you know the history behind it and how quickly it was filmed and edited and produced. And it was basically, a group of stage actors that he gathered together, found a location and guerrilla style filmed that movie. I think, that also makes that particular piece such a magnificent film.
Yes. And of course, Chimes at Midnight too. So my mistake for not mentioning Wells, of course. So yes, I agree.
I do think one of my favorites, just because I love him so much, is Nicole Williamson's Macbeth. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but anybody who has ever seen the movie Excalibur knows Nicole Williamson as Merlin. But
Right.
long before he was Merlin, he was the bloody Scottish king. And I think that stands alone as well as a great, great film.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll have to check that one out. It's not one that I've taught.
Oh, well, there you go.
Something new.
Fantastic.
Yes.
Wow. I feel thrilled now that I gave you a nugget. I gave you one little nugget. You listed off so many magnificent directors earlier that my brain exploded. And I can only imagine that your students must be so appreciative of having someone with your vast knowledge as their instructor but also who does it, who is in it and doing it. And I think that always makes for the best teachers is the ones who have the practicum under their belt. And so I would love to just audit one of your classes, just to sit in for a semester and be able to experience that.
Well, thank you. But I really, I approach it as I'm learning too. And that is why I love teaching, because I'm able to see these films through the eyes of my students and find new meaning in it, So that's really the great thing about teaching, I think, is that we are not just sharing our experience and what we have learned through doing, as you said, through the very act of trying to make a film. It helps you appreciate a film when you're watching it, but also to be able to learn from the students, how they see the world and how they find a way into Shakespeare's world through film. So that's really what motivates me.
Well, that's a perfect segue into our next topic, which is, as a filmmaker, what's next on board for you?
Thank you. I have two projects that I'm working on currently. One is part of a book project that I've been working on with John Hamill, and something that I've been researching on my own in addition, which is about the group of writers and poets in London in the late 1500s. And I think that is something that hasn't been explored before in film or in a series. So I'm kind of excited about pitching that. It could be a documentary, traditional long-form feature-length doc, kind of picking up where we left off. De Vere's come back to London, and now he's writing, in London with this other group of writers. And what interests me is the intersection of the lives of all these people, whether it's Sydney or Marlowe, but people who were working at the same time in the same place, and how they fed off each other and the feedback that they gave to one another. That really fascinates me, again, as a writer who understands the importance of workshopping and getting feedback from other writers, and also the competition between writers and the relationships between writers. It's throughout history that has been something that you get a group of writers together and there's going to be a lot of sparks flying, so that really interests me a lot. And it's a project that I would love to do. And I'm just trying not to limit myself in terms of thinking traditional long-form documentary, maybe it could be a docuseries. So that's part of what I'm working on. That's one project I'm really excited about. And the other one is not related to Shakespeare, but it's a screenplay that I've written that is also set in London. So I'm hoping to travel there again sometime soon. But the screenplay is already done, and it is about these parallel worlds of music through two generations in London of music and fashion, and set in the 1970s and the 1990s. And it's, I think, something that would lend itself very well to an episodic series. So I'm working on kind of reimagining that instead of as a feature film, as a pilot and a series. So those are the two things right now that I'm working on. But they bring together the things that I'm interested in, music and fashion and writing and art.
Well, and of course that leads to, for the listeners who aren't familiar with the original episode of the series here on the podcast that you were on before, where we talked a little more extensively about your previous film. That gives us an opportunity to now explain a little bit about that before we delve into the topic I really want to broach in just a moment, which is that cabal of writers that you just mentioned. But why not take just a brief opportunity to tell those listeners who maybe aren't familiar with your previous film project?
Sure. Thanks, Stephen. The first documentary film that I made is called All Kinds of Girls. It's from a line in a song by the Beach Boys, but it was about a garage punk rock band from Boston who kind of rocketed to fame right away and then kind of imploded. But it was really a lot of fun to make. It features a lot of contemporary musicians because this one particular singer-songwriter was very influential on lots of other musicians later. One of the things that intrigued me about this character was that he was so good at one thing. He was a brilliant singer-songwriter and a disaster at the rest of his life. And so you see there's a bit of a through line there, where I found that same kind of a character in Edward de Vere, someone who was absolutely brilliant in his ability to use words to express himself, whether it was on the page or in person, entertaining people and telling stories. He was absolutely charming by all accounts, but really had a difficult time managing relationships, money, all of the day-to-day kind of normal things, that were really a challenge for him. So that through line there exists. And the way that I came to my first film was that I was in a writer's group and I was writing some memoir stuff about when I was a punk rock band manager. And I was also working as a publicist for other independent filmmakers. So someone in my writing group, said this would make a good screenplay. Why don't you write this memoir stuff as a screenplay? And I said, well, that's an interesting idea. And then I said, I actually know how to make a documentary because I've worked on other people's films. I think I'll try that. And I had a lot of success. I was very happy with the results. It took a long time to make the film, but it had a really nice little art house run, and it played at a lot of music festivals. And I had found something, that really was a great way for me to use my skills as a writer, but also to express something visually. So that was my first foray into film. So I've always had that connection to music. It's something that...
Well, and that would connect to the second project that you just mentioned about the tie-in between the 70s and the 90s and what you're going to focus there.
Right.
And that's why I wanted you to explain to our listeners about your previous film.
Right.
I don't know that most people would make the easy connection between Shakespearean scholar and documentarian to punk rock band manager, but that just goes to show what a Renaissance woman you really are. You cover like the whole gamut. But I think it's ironic that you did a documentary about a punk rock band that was like a comet and hit the streak and then burned out, but because that pretty much explains punk rock as an entire genre of music, I think, not just the individual bands.
Right. Well, that's where the theme was, right? This was one small example that kind of embodied the thing, and that was part of it. It was just at a moment in time. They came at the same time as the New York Dolls. They were right there when everything was happening, and so they were part of that excitement. But
I remember the Cramps and the Sex Pistols.
Sure.
Yeah, I lived through that time. I think we're pretty much contemporaries. So
it's great material, right? It's
absolutely. It was an
exciting time.
But I definitely want to touch on and I agree with you. I think that one of the keys to the entire Shakespeare authorship question is that entire salon of writers who we have such evidence for the fact that they did collaborate, that they did work together, that they all knew each other extremely well. And I believe that the more we explore that facet of history, the more we will find more evidence, more truth about what really happened, how the Shakespeare canon was created, and how Edward de Vere was like this editor-in-chief over this group of writers that he handpicked to become his sort of like Da Vinci studio.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yes, I'm definitely familiar with that theory, and I think that we know that he had people working for him like John Lilly and Anthony Munday, so he had very well known writers working directly for him as his secretaries. But beyond that, I think there's also this interesting idea that there were other, there were rivals, as it says in the sonnet, right? There were other writers writing at the same time. They were writing to each other. They were writing about each other, and I think that dynamic is really interesting too. So I don't think that we have to imagine that Shakespeare, de Vere, and Marlowe ever actually collaborated to wonder, what their interaction was, because they were contemporaries, and I feel like their styles are very different, but I think they clearly would have an influence on one another. So for me, it's really about trying to find the evidence that suggests that they did read each other's work. The idea of passing manuscripts around, that really, really fascinates me, because we know that that's how a lot of the material was first presented. It was passed around privately among friends and critiqued, and again, kind of, responded to and imitated. People wrote poems in response to other people's poems and kind of parodying them. So I think all of that is really interesting to me. I don't think that that we have to assume that de Vere couldn't have written a lot or most of the material that's attributed to Shakespeare, but I do think we need to know more, as you said, about who he was working with at the time. I think that's important.
Well, even in today's modern times, every major show, every major film nowadays has, there are when you see the credits at the end of a film, it'll say, based on a story by screenplay by this person, and this person. Oftentimes the director will get screenplay credit at the last, being the last one listed, because in the process of making the film, the director contributed this scene or these lines or whatever changes were made. I mean, it's a collaborative art. It has always been a collaborative art. When you look at major shows, any television series, it's a group of writers. There's a head writer, yes, but there's a group of writers who contribute. And I just can't imagine that there weren't times when, they're putting together, let's say they're writing Henry V as one of the greatest pro-Tudor propaganda pieces they could ever create. And you get a little writer's block, you get a little stuck, and you go, oh, I need something here. Who's got something for right here? And that's when Anthony Munday pops up and says, oh, how about this? And that's when John Lilly pops up and says, no, how about this? And Fletcher and whoever else is in the room starts throwing out their ideas. And Edward says, okay, all those ideas suck. How about you? Do you have something? And it's right. the little chamber boy who says, well, sir, I think this idea. And he goes, yeah, that's the one I'm going to go with. This is how great art is created all the time. And throughout history, we know it to be true. And I can't imagine that there wasn't some of that created some of the pieces of the canon. We look at certain plays where we go, that play just doesn't seem like it was written by one man. Plays such as Timon of Athens is one where we go, there's some weirdness that happens in the middle of this play.
Right.
Pericles is another one where we go, I'm not sure if this was all one voice or a mixture of voices, or maybe someone put it down and someone else picked it up and finished it.
Right. So that's a different theory. And I think that clearly is quite possible. But to go back to the auteur theory and, the idea of film as a collaborative medium, it's still, the auteur theory comes from the one vision and the director as the writer. So I would say it's more about, the writer and director being one person who then is able to communicate that to the rest of the team. So it's still a collaboration. But for example, if you take Godard and Truffaut, now they did work together. And Fellini, worked as an assistant. For many years to another director, and that's really where he learned to write. So I think it's those kind of relationships that I'm looking for, those, couple of individuals who did in fact collaborate, or who one is a mentor for the other. I mean, clearly I can see De Vere in that role as a mentor for another writer. And I think, the rivalry with Sidney is really fascinating. So for me, as I said, I agree that, he had Lily and Monday writing for him. And I'm really just trying to sort out who was in each one of these groups and who was writing with and for whom. I don't want to make any assumptions about who those people were. I'm really trying to track down, what evidence is there.
I think digging into that is going to be even more fascinating. How did Ben Jonson really feel? How did Marlowe really feel? We know Sidney. I mean, that's probably one of the most clear examples. But how much was there going on with Spencer as well?
Yeah, really interesting.
Yeah, he's another one. And for any of our listeners who are going, I don't know who any of these people are. Well, that's great. That's what this program is about. Now that we've just thrown a bunch of names out there for you to go Google, go get busy on Google and find out who all these players were. I can tell you, as somebody who has adapted works by Marlowe and by Shakespeare, and has produced and directed those adaptations, and has also been a part of the stage productions. There's absolutely no comparing those two at all in my mind whatsoever.
I agree completely as a writer.
Marlowe,
completely.
he is deficient in so many ways in comparison to Shakespeare that it's not truly a comparison. For instance, I took his Dr. Faustus and adapted it.
That's a great play, though. You have to admit that it is. Go ahead.
It is, but the whole center section of it is terrible. It has a magnificent beginning and it has a magnificent ending, and the middle is crap. And so I just basically rewrote the middle of the play for the production that I produced. And I would never, ever attempt to do that with a Shakespeare play.
No, you wouldn't.
It's just not possible.
Yeah,
and the fact that it's just not possible, and the fact that it is possible with Marlowe, I think is indicative of the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, no, I just taught last semester, world drama, where we start with the Greeks, and we go through, we talk about, Han King, the Chinese Shakespeare, and we do the Japanese writers, and it's a really wonderful course, Indian writers, but we end with the Renaissance. It's from the Greeks to the Renaissance, so it's a wonderful course. And at the end of the class, we have Shakespeare, Marlowe, Fletcher, all of the Elizabethans, and it's really interesting to read them all together, with the group of students who are discovering these works and see the stark stylistic differences. There are big differences. I mean, I think the one way that Marlowe rivals our Shakespeare de Vere is that he had a very interesting life. He was a really fascinating character, so I give him credit for that. On that, he gave de Vere a run for his money, let's say.
Amen to that. He sure did.
But as a writer, that's what I'm interested. As a writer, that's what I'm always interested in. That's how I found Edward de Vere. He's a fascinating character. When I heard about him, I said, "Wow, I want to make a film about this guy." So that's, as a writer, that's how I approach most of my topics, from the character, and it's been really fun, the whole journey. So
where will you clue in? Like what when you go about the process of, I'm going to explore this for a film, where will you clue in? Will you clue in on the relationship between de Vere and Sidney and begin there? Will you clue in on his relationships with Monday and Lily and then kind of evolve out of there? Like, what do you vision as being your starting point for the next step of this?
Yeah, I am thinking of kind of picking up where we left off. He's back in London. He's writing. He's got a group of writers. He's not, living at court, and then, moving out from there. So that is the way that I see it right now, is taking what we do know about who he was working with and expanding out from there. And in terms of research, after I gave my talk at Hartford about this topic, the lives of the poets in 1590s London, a few people suggested to me that I should get in touch with Stephen Mays, who's one of the best living scholars on the topic of Elizabethan poetry, and has written a lot about Edward de Vere, and he was a source that I used for my own research, on this idea of passing manuscripts around and kind of annotating them and giving feedback that way. So that's one of the things that I would like to do is talk with him. He's not an Oxfordian, but he knows his stuff, and he knows who Edward de Vere was, and he acknowledges the fact that Edward de Vere was a great writer, and so that alone, I think, makes him an important resource.
So, chicken and egg question here. Do you believe that de Vere's assembly of these writers was a result of the 1,000-pound annuity from the Queen, who wanted her propaganda machine in place? Or do you believe that he did it through his own artistic pursuits, and when she learned that he had this machine, she gave him the 1,000-pound annuity to put it to her use?
Well, all I can say on that is that we know that the 1,000-pound a year annuity is a key piece of evidence. We don't know, exactly why it was intentionally. Bonner Cutting has done brilliant research on this in her book, Necessary Mischief. You can read all about it. It was intentionally not specified why she was giving it to him, and no one was to question it. And so it's really mysterious. But my gut feeling as a writer is that it was more of an organic process, that he was a writer. As a director, what I do is I try to find the best people and get them to work for me and keep them with me. That's the best strategy for a director-producer. Find the best editor, find the best camera person, find the best actors, find the best people, and then keep them as part of your team. Make sure they're happy and feel valued, So I can imagine de Vere being that kind of an artist, that he wanted to work with the best people because they inspired him, or because, he wanted to be surrounded by people who were great minds, So I would see it more as an organic process, and I honestly do not have any knowledge about which came first in terms of the annuity. So I can't answer that question.
You don't think that there was maybe also an element to him that he liked being the big man. He liked the fact that he not only these men were not just his friends. In fact, in many cases, they were not nearly his equal in any way. And I'm not even talking about like creatively or brain power. I'm talking about in position and class.
Right.
And he employed many of them, meaning that he held the purse strings through which they were fed.
Right. Well, I mean,
do you think there was a little bit of powerness involved in that, a little bit of glory and having that power over them? And do you think that that's sort of reflected in Timon of Athens when suddenly the money is gone?
Everyone turned against him. Yeah, he was always, What do you mean? I gave you everything. It's a great play because of that, because you can really kind of imagine De Vere liked to spend money. He liked to give away money. You know, there's a great anecdote in Mark Anderson's book, which is the basis of my film, the book Shakespeare by Another Name. On the way, on his way to Italy, he gave someone, a couple of pence or something, and he wrote down in his book, for the making of a man. I mean, he thought he was just so benevolent, and he loved giving money away and loved spending money, So I think clearly he had an ego. What writer, performer, director doesn't? And
I have no idea what you're talking about.
But from contemporary evidence, you can. I've always loved the image of him. I think Hank Whittemore was the first one who put it so brilliantly for me when I was interviewing him. He said, "Boy, when he walked into a room, bam, everybody stopped. All eyes went to him. I mean, he had tremendous charisma from everything that we know about him, and was able to, completely captivate a room full of people. And again, I always think not unlike Dorothy Parker, at the round table. So that's another way that I envision him. He really loved to be the center of attention. Yes, I think
sure.
he did.
I use that analogy a lot. The Algonquin Club,
exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's going to be exciting to watch it start to come together, just as it was so exciting to watch Has Nothing Truer Than Truth has evolved the way that it has evolved. And I know it's going to be a long journey, but if it turns out anything like the last one, it's going to be incredible. And I want to encourage everybody, if you haven't gone, Amazon Prime, you can find it right there. Nothing Truer Than Truth, filmmaker Cheryl Eagan-Donovan. And if you haven't seen it, you need to see it. I will caution you that once you have watched it, Amazon will algorithm you and start sending more Shakespeare authorship question stuff your way, because it's constantly recommending that I watch Cheryl's film because it knows me and it knows my interests. The crazy computer. Cheryl, I want to thank you for joining us again for what has become another fascinating episode. I am always mesmerized by your knowledge of what you do and those who have come before and those who are doing it now that are contemporaries that you look up to and admire. And I'll say it again with all sincerity, your students must be just so thrilled to have you as an instructor with not only your knowledge, but also your experience and comprehension of the art. And thank you for being here.
Thank you, Stephen. Your praise is just too effusive. And I mean, I'm going to try to keep that in mind as we prepare for our online classes in these next few weeks. So I really appreciate it. Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
And we want to remind everybody that Don't Quill the Messenger is brought to you by the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org, ShakespeareOxfordFellowship.org. It is your source and resource for everything you need to know about the Shakespeare authorship question. It will lead you to many resources and many inquiries and tons of wonderful information. So go visit the website and explore that for a little while. If you haven't already, please be sure to rate and review the podcast at whatever streaming service you are using to listen to us. We would love to get your comments. We'd love to have you give us a 5-star rating or whatever rating system your streaming service involves. Go to dragonwagonradio.com. You'll find an incredible plethora of other podcasts that you might be interested on the network. We're proud to be a part of that network, and we're proud of the other show hosts who bring you great products there through the network on a regular basis. And don't forget to visit the store and get your swag. You can find your Don't Quill the Messenger merchandise there. It makes for wonderful conversation pieces to explain to people just exactly what the Shakespeare authorship question is. And we want to always remind you at the end of every episode, we never forget to say, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com. don'tquillthepodcast.com.
It's Dragon Wagon.